Hi. So I'd like to give you sort of an overview of what I think are some really helpful tips when it comes to writing and specifically grammar. And so I'm just going to kind of work through this a little bit, and I hope that it helps you sort of organize your papers and helps you with your writing style a little bit. So the first thing has to do with apostrophes, and I think that this is what I usually see as one of the biggest issues is people get a little bit confused about when to use apostrophes. So these are two examples. You can, if the word that you are putting the apostrophe on ends with an S, there's a little bit of disagreement about whether or not you need the actual apostrophe S or if you can just use the apostrophe. Both are okay. My own self, I like this. I think Charles's friend does it. There's no point I don't see the point in having an extra S, but I know a lot of people feel very strongly that you have to have the S, but it's up to you. But I would always kind of say less is more, and I think that does a good enough job. So one of the things that I think trips people up the most is that apostrophes are used to show possession, and that's their only use in the English language. A lot of times people use apostrophes to show that there's plurals. And this is something that I've been seeing get worse and worse as the years go on. And so this is something to really sort of pay attention to because an apostrophe really changes the meaning of a word. So this is an acceptable use of an apostrophe. That is Megan's car. We know the car belongs to Megan. She's the person who owns it. So we put the apostrophe S, Megan's car. This is something that was wrong in many of your midterm papers, and so I'd like you to sort of pay attention to this. That was the colonists' idea. This word here, colonist, without the S, that is one colonist, one person who lived in the colony. So if we had one colonist's idea, it would be colonist with an apostrophe S. But here we're talking about all of the colonists. And when that's the case, it's S to make it plural, showing us that there's more than one colonist. And then if something belongs to the colonists, like all the colonists shared this one idea, then it becomes the colonist's idea. So myself, I wouldn't do the apostrophe S. I would just do the apostrophe to show my thoughts. But you could definitely add the S on here if you wanted, the colonist's idea. But without it, it's okay, perfectly acceptable. This is something that I see all the time. Come have some sandwiches. So the plural of sandwich, is sandwiches. We put an ES here. But a lot of times people, I think they just get a little bit confused and they throw in an apostrophe. So the only time you want to use an apostrophe is if you're showing that something belongs to somebody else. If you're doing a plural, you're showing that there's more than one. Almost always you're just going to add an S. You don't need to add any apostrophes. Apostrophes are only used to show possession. So we get rid of that one. A couple things that I find funny. So here you have the superhero apostrophe man taking the chalk away because specials does not need an apostrophe. It's just plural. There's more than one special, so we write specials. This is one of my favorite professional signs and lettering. This person is trying to show us that there's more than one sign, but we don't need an apostrophe for that. You just signs. And it's unfortunate that it's professional signs and lettering with a grammatical mistake in it. Dentists look after your teeth. Who looks after theirs? No need for an apostrophe right there. This is something you see all the time. She flies. So when we say she flies, it's FLIES with her own wings. And so again, unless the wings are owning something, there's no apostrophe. It's just more than one wing, WINGS. Commas are something else that can be a little bit confusing for people. We use commas when we are talking about three or more things. So in this red and blue, there's just two things, and they're being separated by and. And the and shows us that each one is separate, red and blue. Red, white, and blue is also acceptable because we see the red and then you have white and blue separating them. This here is what I prefer, and there's a lot. it's kind of surprising that there's controversy when it comes to grammar, but there is. And so this is actually kind of controversial. This is called here the Oxford comma, and there's a lot of people who say you should not use it, that it's just redundant. And if you read most newspapers will not include the Oxford comma because they say it takes up too much space. But I like it because it separates and lets you know that there's three specific colors. So there's the red, there's the white, and the blue. Um, I would highly recommend you use it, although there's a lot of people who would probably tell you not to use it, but I think it's an important thing to use. Commas are used to separate clauses. And so what a clause is it is a group of words that by themselves can be an independent sentence because it has both a subject and a verb. So in this, I like her, we could very much put a period right there. I like her, period. But then we have some additional information, but Charles does not. Whenever we have, this is called a conjunction because it joins two clauses together. Whenever we have a conjunction, typically you're always going to put a comma before it. I like her, comma, but Charles does not. So we have this clause. Charles does not could be its own complete sentence because we have a subject and a verb. And so because we're separating two clauses, we want that comma in there. Commas are used to separate parenthetic expressions, and that expression itself sounds quite kind of weighty, but we do this a lot in our writing. Parenthetic expressions are essentially things that would go in parentheses. It's that extra information that people put into sentences. So in this sentence, she always went except on Sundays to the grocery store. So if I were saying that out loud, it would sound fine. I would know that she always went to the grocery store, but she didn't go on Sundays, except on Sundays. But it's that except on Sundays, that's a parenthetical expression. That's extra information. So she always went, except on Sundays, to the grocery store. And the reason why I have to set this off is because, excuse me, this sentence would work fine without this information. So look at this. She always went to the grocery store. Sounds fine. This extra information, it's almost like we're putting that in parentheses. She always went, not on Sundays, to the grocery store. And so when you're doing that, you need to separate that out with commas. That extra information. Basically, you can picture parentheses here. And those parentheses are being set off by what looks to be little parentheses, little commas. She always went, comma, except on Sundays, comma, to the grocery store. So the bottom one's good, top one's bad. So some other examples. We're going to learn to cut and paste. Whenever you're talking to someone, you usually sort of want to put that comma in there to let them know who you're talking to. So in this unfortunate advertisement, it says that we are going to literally learn how to cut and paste up kids, right? But if we're talking to the kids, we just put a comma right there, like that. We're going to learn to cut and paste, kids, letting the kids know that they're about to learn how to cut and paste. Without that comma, it can be some tragic results. A comma here can make a huge amount of difference in this situation because let's eat grandma means let's eat grandma. Let's eat, comma, grandma. Come on, grandma, it's time for dinner. So you can see the effect of a comma here. The difference between let's eat grandma and let's eat grandma. This is one of my favorites because you can see how a comma can drastically change a sentence. And this has to do with the Oxford comma and why I think the Oxford comma is essential. So if we look at this first sentence, I want to thank my parents, John and Lisa. So in this first sentence, we know that there are probably two parents. I want to thank my parents, 1 and 2. And now this comma is separating out, I also want to thank John. And now I want to thank Lisa. So in this first sentence, 4 people are being thanked. If you want to look at this next sentence here, you'll notice the only difference is this comma is missing. Now look what this does, this missing comma to this sentence. I want to thank my parents, John and Lisa. In this case, there's only 2 people, because this is acting as sort of a parenthetical expression. I want to thank my parents. Their names are John and Lisa. So in this one, there's only sort of recognition for 2 people. That comma there can make a huge difference between who's actually being thanked. So I would pay close attention to your commas, make sure that you're using them wisely and effectively. Um, if you want to tell someone to stop clubbing baby seals, then no comma. Stop clubbing baby seals. That's your message. With the comma, we're telling the baby seals to go home. No more partying. One of the things that I see misused a lot are semicolons, and this confuses people. And I think it's not their fault because a lot of times Microsoft Word suggests adding a semicolon when you really don't need a semicolon. So if you're going to use a semicolon, whatever you've written to the left of the semicolon needs to be a complete sentence. And whatever you've written to the right of the semicolon needs to be a complete sentence. So if you look here, make sure sentences are complete. I can put a period there. Semicolons are used to separate two complete sentences. I could also put a period there. But I'm using a semicolon because those two sentences basically support each other. So instead of having two sentences, I can have one large sentence that support each other. Both the left and the right side of that sentence, separated by the semicolon, give support to what the other one's talking about. So here are two examples. I met Paul and Tom on a bus from California, moving from Sacramento to New Mexico. And the second one is, I met Paul and Tom on a bus from California. I was moving from Sacramento to New Mexico. So I'll give you a second to just kind of think about that, and then we'll talk about which one's correct and which one's not correct. So in this case, it is the bottom one that is correct because this is an incomplete sentence. Moving from Sacramento to New Mexico. We don't know who is doing the moving. It doesn't have a subject of that sentence. It does not tell us who the sentence is talking about. So here, I met Paul and Tom on a bus from California. I was moving from Sacramento to New Mexico. So this tells us why this person was on a bus and met Paul and Tom. Those could be two completely separate sentences, but because this secondary information here supports us finding out how the person met Paul and Tom, it's useful to use the semicolon. It would be perfectly acceptable to just put a period here and have two sentences, but the semicolon is another way to do that. Here's another two examples. In 1769, when Napoleon was born, Corsica had but recently been acquired by France. In 1769, when Napoleon was born, Corsica had but recently been acquired by France. So here's another case, same exact sentences. The only thing difference is here that we have the offsets of the commas. And we want the offsets of the comma because we have a parenthetical expression here. In 1769, listen to this sentence. In 1769, Corsica had but recently been acquired by France. That sentence works completely fine on its own. It makes complete sense. But here we're adding that little bit of extra information. Napoleon was affiliated with Corsica. So that's why we're sort of connecting the two. So in 1769, when Napoleon was born, Corsica had but recently been acquired by France. This is also another issue, and it's starting to become a little bit more difficult because we're talking more about people's pronouns, and so it can be a little bit confusing how people choose to refer to themselves. But in your writing, you want to always try to be as specific as possible. So in this sentence, one of the cars are missing. The R matches up with cars because there's more than one car. But the problem is that one of the cars is missing. So we have 6 cars, one is missing. So it's the second sentence. One of the cars is missing. So you always want to make sure that your verb, the action of the sentence, matches the subject of the sentence. If I said the cars are missing, I'm good to go. But the fact that I've specified that one of the cars is missing, I need to be one is missing. Each of the potato chips are broken. So this is one that trips people up a lot because they say potato chips and each one are broken. But imagine yourself picking out potato chips from the bag. And each one you pick out is broken. Broken chip, broken chip, broken chip. So each Each one of the potato chips is broken. Even though we have a plural, it's each of the potato chips. If I said all of the potato chips are broken, that's correct. But the fact that I'm saying each one that I pull out of that bag is broken. And so this kind of gets into this last example is where people have a little bit of difficulty. And it has to do with there. So in this case, I have a student will bring their book. There is what we use when we're talking about more than one person. So this one is incorrect because it says a student. What we want to say instead is a student will bring his book or a student will bring her book. If you want to sort of avoid this entire mess, then make sure you have a plural subject. Students should bring their books. So if you're talking about the colonists, then you can talk about their ideas. But if you're talking about a specific colonist or a specific student, then we want to use his or her, depending on the gender of the singular person we're talking about. One of the questions that people have is the who or whom. So should I say who or should I say whom? And the best way to answer that is to just finish the sentence and answer the question. The thing that I see all the time wrong on Facebook has to do with me and I. And I see people say, here's a picture of I. No, it's always me. And so if you're ever captioning a picture somewhere, it's not I and Dad, it's not I and Tom, it's not I and Bill. It's me and Bill. This is a picture of me. You would never say it's a picture of I. So something to think about. You can see it here. Tom and me went to the park. Would you say me went to the park today? You would not. So it's Tom and I went to the park. So what I do is I always kind of say things out in my head. Would I say me went to the park? Would I say me goes, Tom and me goes to the baseball game? Tom and me went to the softball game? I would not. Tom and I. So make sure that you're balancing those out, that whatever you are saying after that would make logical sense. Me went to the park? No, me did not go to the park. I went to the park. Who and whom is another kind of confusing one, but I think this is actually pretty easy to remember. When the answer of a question is him, whom, whom, that's when you use whom, if it's going to be him or her. So if I said, who are you dating? My answer would be, I'm dating him or I'm dating her. So we would actually say, whom are you dating? So that should give you a couple of tips for writing your paper. I do want to give you one more tip, and that's basically sort of organization. I am a really big fan of what's known as sort of the Harvard essay. And you probably learned this in school. Your teachers probably didn't tell you it was called the Harvard essay. But I think it's an effective tool, and I've kind of tweaked it myself. It's not really the Harvard essay as others would consider it. But this is what I would highly suggest to you for all writing in this class. And your other professors may have different topics, different ideas for you. But this, I think, is the best way to organize your paper. So the first thing you want to start out with is an introduction. Your introduction should tell your reader what you're about to write. And so specifically, your introduction should specify your thesis statement. So for this first upcoming writing assignment, I'm asking you whether or not the American Revolution was a revolution. So you might have a couple of like introductory remarks, but at some point in introduction you should say, due to the evidence available, or something along those lines. I'm going to have to learn how to spell available. The revolution, we'll say the American Revolution, was not a revolution, but a war for independence. If you're actually arguing the other case, both are fine. Independence. You want to say the American Revolution was completely a revolution and not just a war for independence. And then you should go on a little bit and tell me some examples. Give me 1 or 2 sentences of examples that you're about to explain in this paper. So this is your introduction. And then before you even write another word, I would very strongly urge you to have an outline ready. So if you're going to be making an argument, you say, I'm going to make an argument about slavery, and I'm going to have this example, and I'm going to have this example, and I'm going to have this example. And I'm going to make an argument about women. So I'm going to have this example and this example. And I'm going to make an argument about religion. So I have this example and this example. So each of these topics, this should be its own paragraph. And this paragraph should lead me in. The last sentence of this paragraph should lead me into this paragraph. And the last sentence of this paragraph should lead me into this paragraph. Those are called transitions. You always want to transition from one paragraph to the next so that your point is constantly being made throughout the paper. Your job here is to convince me of your way of thinking here. I've asked you, was the American Revolution a revolution, or was it just a war for independence? And so now you have to prove this to me. You have to make the strongest case possible for what you believe. And as I told you in another video, it's okay to have whatever opinion you have on this, as long as you're strongly arguing it in your paper. So once you have done a nice job, and I would highly recommend that any paper you write have at least 3 body paragraphs. And this, you're going to have more than that because that's what the paper calls for. But you're going to have specifics and reasons, transitions to another specific and reasons, a transition to specific and reasons. When you finish up your paper, you want a conclusion. You want your conclusion to restate your introduction, essentially. I'm not saying copy word for word, but to remind me again of what your argument was, even though you should be arguing your argument throughout the entire paper. You're going to restate your introduction, and you're going to have sort of a concluding statement that essentially summarizes what you've just argued in your paper. That way, when I leave your paper, I can say, oh, right, he started out talking about this was not a war for independence, and he gave me these examples, and by the end, he again reminded me that he argued this was not a war for independence, and those examples he gave me were restated here. Or I might say, okay, she said that this was not an American Revolution, and she gave me these examples, and the conclusion stated, again, her belief that this was not a revolution, and she mentioned again those major ideas that she made. So your introduction, your conclusion, should introduce me to your paper and then end your paper for me, so that I come into it knowing what I'm about to read, and then I leave it knowing what I've just read, and then I get sort of that final argument from you. Another thing that we need to talk about is putting in your sources. So when you are writing a paper for history and for just about any of your classes, you need to cite all of your information. Now, this is how I would go about writing your paper if I were you. So let's say one of the examples of slavery you want to use is the Pennsylvania Gradual Abolition Bill. So what I would highly recommend to you is that you put this into your own words. So we'll say in 1780, Pennsylvania acted to I should have had a plan here before I started typing. So in 1780, Pennsylvania acted to limit the effects of slavery within its state. Specifically, and then here you could talk about all the things in that Pennsylvania gradual abolition bill. Then, once you are done talking about that, you need to cite your source. So we can say, and you can actually cite the title of it. I think it's an act for gradual abolition. And I'll know where that comes from. That's it. As long as you put the title of that document, you're good to go. If it's something from Foner, so maybe Foner said something that struck a chord with you. And this is where I would highly recommend you to start changing your writing styles. You could very easily get something that Foner said, put it in quotation marks, and say that came from Foner on page 73. And when you do that, it always goes quote, parenthesis, author's last name, the page number, parenthesis, and then you end your sentence. So you'll notice here, this is a bad example. Slavery existed in Pennsylvania. We'll say that comes up on page 73 in Foner. So if that's Foner's sentence, I'm not putting a period within the quotation marks. I'm saving my period to end the sentence. So that's acceptable, that you use a direct quotation from Foner. And you can do that, and I actually sort of encourage you to do it. But I encourage you to limit it. For example, you should have probably no more than 5 quotations from the textbook, and those quotations should be fewer than 100 words in length. If your quotation is more than 3 lines long, it's too long. You want something else. So what I would really sort of strongly encourage you to do, instead of putting everything in quotation marks, is put it into your own words and then cite that it came from Foner. So you could say something like, slavery existed in the United States. One of the states that had slavery was Pennsylvania. So here, I'm not directly quoting Foner. Foner's exact sentence, and again, I'm making this up just for these purposes, was that slavery existed in Pennsylvania. And so because that was the exact sentence, I put it in direct quotation marks. Here, this was what Foner said. I put it into my own words. Slavery exists in the United States. One of the states that had slavery was Pennsylvania. So I know where that information came from. It came from this sentence here. And I put it into my own words, so I don't need quotation marks, but I tell you where I got that information. In many midterms, this was lacking. I did not have any citations at all. So for this first writing assignment, you're going to need to beef up your citations and make those more clear so that I know where your information is coming from. So those are some really good tips that I would encourage you to follow. And writing is always something that we're all working on. I'm still working on my writing. My college professors are still working on their writing. It's something that we're all in together. So don't feel nervous about your writing. Don't feel like your writing's not good enough. We're always all learning to be better writers. So again, I hope these tips were good, and I look forward to seeing what you come up for with your first writing assignment.